Hey there, my name is Mia and I am the creator behind Knit and Grace, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to walk through sort of my 2022 intentions as well as my plan makes. As I mentioned in my last podcast episode. So, I think I went over sort of my intentions for this channel in general in the last podcast episode, but I also wanted to talk through sort of my making intentions as well as the things that I wanted to make this year, both with regard to knitting as well as sewing. So I guess, we should start with just 2022 and where we are, and I guess I'm filming this at the beginning of January-ish, middle of January, and we're still in sort of the global situation that we're in, and that's actually where some of my intentions are stemming from. So with regard to my knitting over the last 2 years, it's been a little bit of a start and stop fitful sort of situation until the end of last year, when I really got sort of my knitting mojo back. And then alternatively, during the pandemic, I really started focusing on sewing and learning to sew and refining my sewing skills. So I had known how to sew pretty much my whole life. My mom taught me when I was a little girl, and when I actually started sewing at the beginning of the pandemic, I was using a very old machine that's as old as I am actually. My mom got it when I was born. It was an old Panasonic six-stitch machine, and it really did the job for me when I really was sort of in the learning process. And then through that sort of learning process, I actually ended up getting a serger. I got a new machine as well, and really started banging out a lot of projects. And I think that the reason why I sort of switched from knitting into sewing was really that kind of almost instant gratification that you get from a sewing project, in terms of, you could spend a weekend sewing up a project and really have an entire project done in the weekend, from, your printing of the pattern, cutting of the pattern, cutting your fabric, and then ultimately sewing the piece. And so I really was banging out a lot of sewing projects. And so not only because of that instant gratification, but really just learning new skills and sort of learning how to fit things to myself, watching a lot of YouTube videos, reading a lot of vlogs. I sort of got into this mindset of like acquiring fabric and sewing up lots and lots of projects, which, part of the reason why I make is really to be not only more sustainable, but sort of get away from that fast fashion mentality. And so unfortunately, I think just with my mind space where I was, it really kind of lended itself to this sort of like quick finishing of projects. So even though I pretty much didn't buy any clothing over the last 2 years, I was still sort of producing a lot. And so that led to sort of this feeling that I really wanted to sort of figure out what was the next best thing, what was the next project I was going to do. I was going to the fabric store all the time, getting fabric, different things, and, sewing up pieces that I really loved, but ultimately, I would wear here and there, and then ultimately just move on to the next project. So that kind of brings me into my intentions for 2022, especially as I've gotten sort of my knitting mojo back, and really just taking a step back and taking my making in general just at a much slower pace. And so, you know, one of the things that knitting affords us is really slowing down. You know, every single stitch adds up to a larger project. And sewing can definitely be that way, but it can definitely, you know, you can fall into this trap of just constantly making, especially when we're on social media and you're, you know, looking at other people's Instagrams and people are producing and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I'm approaching 2022, is sort of, you know, focusing a little bit more on my knitting, and then also in my sewing, also slowing down that process and really thinking through the things that I'm making. So, you know, is it made, you know, is it making sure that I'm making things slowly and therefore taking the time with finishing, which sometimes I don't. Is the project that I'm sewing something that's going to fill a hole in my wardrobe, and therefore I'm going to wear it for longer periods of time? Also, is the piece sort of a classic piece and not sort of, you know, an in fashion piece right now, and therefore it's going to also stand the test of time? So, you know, sort of taking my sewing from that approach, but also my knitting as well. Because in the past, you know, we all have those pieces that are super fun to knit with, or the crazy colors that we, you know, reach for because they're super fun, but then maybe it doesn't really go with our day-to-day wardrobe, so we don't wear them as much. So that's kind of the way that I'm approaching my making in 2022. Also just being conscious of less waste. A craft like sewing especially can produce a lot of waste. And so something that I've gotten into recently is patchworking all of my fabric scraps and making new projects out of them. And then with my knitting, a lot of the times, you know, because I'm shortening things or lengthening things, or, you know, just also with the yardage ease that is usually built into patterns, I end up with a lot of scraps. Probably not as much as with my sewing, but I do end up with a lot of scraps. So, and also just the need to sort of buy yarn, you know, sometimes sort of, I always say, like, you know, knitting and sewing is a completely different hobby from buying fabric and yarn, right? They're two separate different hobbies, and each has their own sort of purpose. And so definitely, you know, sometimes I can fall into the, oh my god, this yarn is pretty, I don't know what I'm going to make with it, so I'm just going to buy it. And so that's sort of one of my things that I want to do this year, is knit down my stash, sew down my stash, and then also hopefully rehome some of the things that I know ultimately I'm never going to either knit with or sew with. So all that to say, you know, sort of 2022 is going to be hopefully a year of more intentional and sustainable making for me, and hopefully you all enjoy following me on that journey. So I do have a list of things that I want to make. So I did sit down and I did think through like the things that I wanted to make, the projects I already had either yarn or fabric for. Some projects I had twirled in 2021 and never got around to actually making the final project. So I have a few projects like that. And ultimately, I was sort of thinking through, you know, sort of like the Make 9 trend on Instagram. And ultimately, I came up with 2 Make 9 lists. So one for knitting and one for sewing. So what I'll do is in the description below, I will put a timestamp for when I start talking about one or the other, so that you can fast forward if you're not interested in listening to the full list. But I do have my list of patterns here, so a total of 18 patterns, and I wanted to walk through them with you. And some of them actually have even been finished by the time that I have started this video. So I was on a little bit of a knitting kick at the beginning of the year, so hopefully that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm gonna start, you know, crazy knitting at the end of the year. But I think as the weather warms up later on in the year and I tend to switch more towards sewing, I should be okay. So I will start with my knitting, the knitting patterns that I plan on making this year and sort of walking you through that. So the first pattern that I had, and the first item that I actually finished in the year, so you all would have already seen it in my December makes video, because it was mostly a December make, although I did finish it at the beginning of 2022, and I sort of finished it after I had already made my make 9 list. So is the Aido wrap by Melody Hoffman. So I knit this up using Plotilo-P, the 5 or 6 colors that she called for, with the exception of I did swap one color out. So I will link my December Minx video down below so you can take a look at that if you're interested in finding out a little bit more of the details. I'll also link to my Ravelry page for the project. So my next pattern that I'm hoping to work up is the Sempasuchil t-shirt by my friend Magali of the Knit Yorker. And so this is actually a test knit that I'm actually in the middle of knitting right now. She's given us a few extensions and, you know, graciously, but she will be hopefully releasing the pattern in the spring. So it is due on February 10th. So I am speedily knitting that tee. So hopefully that will be what I'm in my January makes video. That is my goal, to finish it by the end of the month. So next up, I have 2 Andrea Mowry patterns. The first being the Weekender, which I spoke about in my Rhinebeck haul. I actually got yarn for this sweater in Rhinebeck, which actually is sitting right behind me. So I got from Primrose Yarn Co. I got these 2 skeins, which will be held together to make the Weekender. And then I also have yarn to make the Woolen Honey, which I do think that I spoke to in one of my recent podcasts, but I got some Knit Picks palette for that project at the same time that I got the yarn that I am making the test knit out of. So that is 3 and 4. Number 5 is the Triangular Triangles wrap by Pearl Soho, and actually I am wearing the Triangular Triangle shawl today. And this one was knit out of Feels Like Alpaca, which is a Line brand yarn, and I was actually snapping some pictures of it so before we give it to our aunt. So this was sort of a combined Christmas birthday gift. Her birthday is mid-January, so she will be getting this lovely wrap, but I am planning on making another one for my mother. This was just such a meditative knit. I just fell in love, and this was actually sort of the project that pulled me out of my knitting funk and really got me back my knitting mojo. So I'm really excited to work up another one, and I'm even thinking about potentially working up another one for myself as well, so we will see. Next up, we have 2 more Melody Hoffman projects. So one is the Wild Posy jumper, which I actually just finished. I think I finished it in like a week. And it was just such a fun pattern, and it really literally just flew off my needles. And I had bought some more Plotilo-P in my last order that I placed to Iceland, and so that was actually, I talked about that in my last podcast, and I've since actually seen my friend Marjorie, who I handed off her box of yarn to. You can follow her Instagram handle is Handmade by Marjorie. And we got to have a little bit of a knitting lunch date, and she even snapped like the most beautiful picture of me, which will probably be up on my Instagram page by the time that this video goes up. So definitely go ahead and check that out. But I did finish the sweater, and that was, I guess, my second finish make of the year. So that was really exciting before I moved on to my test knit. And so then the other pattern that I have is going to be the Wildflower Path jumper. And so that's the one that, if you recall, when I had bought my initial order from the Icelandic store, I had purchased a sweater's quantity of the Oatmeal Heather color of Plotilope, and while I really loved it, I didn't love it for the Wild Posy jumper, so that yarn is going to be used for that sweater. So that one will probably be knit up a little bit later in the year, because depending on how quickly things warm up here, we actually haven't gotten a lot of snow so far this year in January, so we'll see how much snow we get in February, because depending on how quickly things warm up here in the Northeast, I may not be knitting with sort of unprocessed yarn for much longer. So I think that's 6 and 7. And then I have a shawl pattern that I'm going to be making for myself, and that is the Veltegarth shawl by Gudrun Johnston. And I actually have the yarn for that shawl already, I just haven't gotten around to knitting it. And I had gotten that yarn a while ago when I had placed a big order from Webs for some yarn that I was planning on making gifts out of. So I actually had initially purchased a different yarn for this shawl, as well as a different yarn for a shawl that I wanted to make for my mom. I wanted to make a different shawl, but ultimately I wasn't liking the yarn and pattern combo for both of those. So they will be repurposed for something else, but in that order I had also bought yarn for myself for a shawl. So I had sort of bought 3 shawls worth of yarn in that order. So I already have that yarn, and I believe it's a Cloudborn yarn. It's an alpaca. So I'm really excited to knit that up. And then last but not least, I have the Bits and Bobs socks by Morgan Panich. And so I'll sort of talk to another thing that didn't necessarily make my Make 9 list, just the general concept in general. But Melody Hoffman, she is hosting a year-long natural sock along for 2022. So essentially knitting socks with non-superwash, non-nylon containing wools, and sort of, you know, finding the best yarns and best pattern combinations for using non-superwash socks to make your socks, or non-superwash sock yarn to make your socks. And I really loved this idea, especially as I'm getting more into the rustic yarn, or like, even if it's not necessarily more rustic, sort of getting away from the superwash, getting away from anything that has nylon or acrylic. I mean, obviously exceptions being if I'm gifting something, or, you know, if I really fall in love with the yarn or I already have it. But I'm really sort of, you know, in my effort to be more sustainable, also trying to get away from some of those practices and some of those materials that are not necessarily the best for the environment. So that, combined with the fact that in the last 2 years, you know, we haven't been commuting, I also haven't been knitting as much. I really haven't knit a lot of socks, and lo and behold, like over the holidays, my husband felted 4 of my socks accidentally, and so I'm just like, whoa, like I haven't knit socks in forever. He felted 4 of my socks. Not that I don't have plenty more of hand knit socks, but I decided that I did want to sort of explore more natural sock yarn. So I am going to be joining in on the sock along, as she's calling it, and I'm planning on knitting up 1 sock per month, you know, using different non-superwash socks, a sock yarn. And so I had placed an order, and I already got some Tuku wool, as well as some Mondine, and I'm hoping to explore some other sock yarns. But the plan is to make 1 pair of socks a month. And then most people, but especially me, because I have tiny little feet, you, at the end of making a pair of socks, you always end up having bits and bobs left over. And so that's where Morgan Panish's pattern comes in, is it's actually made using your leftover yarn bits from your socks. So in total, I hope to knit a total of 13 pairs of socks in the year. So one for each month, and then the 13th will be the bits and bobs socks using my leftover yarn bits. So that is, I think that takes you through all of my knitting plans for the year. So definitely a little bit extensive and a little bit, we'll see if I get through everything, but I think that I can definitely do it, and I'm really excited about each piece that I'm planning on working this year, and I'm really excited to see what the end of the year wardrobe is going to look like. So now I will switch over to my sewing plans and the projects that I'm planning on making. As I see my my timestamp is going to be a bit of a long video, but hopefully you are still with me. So the first pattern on my list is actually the Cielo dress by Closet Core Patterns, and interestingly enough, this was actually the first project that I finished in 2021. So I actually ended up spending like New Year's Day listening to a Gretchen Rubin's podcast episode and sewing up this like beautiful dress pattern. And so I have already sewn it, and I have featured it on my Instagram, and I made it out of a blue 100% linen fabric that I had picked up at my local Joann. But at the end of last year, when actually it looked like we were probably going to start going back into the office, I had picked up a really beautiful houndstooth patterned flannel fabric that I wanted to make another dress out of. So I already have the pattern, I already have the fabric for the dress, so I finally plan on making the dress. So we'll see when, you know, life goes back to somewhat normal, but that is on my making list for the year. The next three patterns are Sew Liberated patterns. So the first one is the estuary skirt, which I have made before and I love. I made it in like a green linen rayon blend fabric. And so I actually wanted to make another one. And the fabric that I plan on using for this one I also already have, and it's actually the sort of check print, or it has the cross print linen fabric that I had purchased that initially I was planning on making my wool furk dress out of. And I ended up loving, you know, and I wear my pink wool furk dress all the time and I love it so much. But after making the dress, I don't think that the fabric is going to lend itself well to that pattern. So I think that the fabric will actually lend itself better to a skirt pattern in terms of the pattern of the actual fabric. So I'm planning on making another estuary skirt because I love the skirt. It's sort of a really great, you know, pull on everyday skirt. I love the length of it. I love the pockets. I love that it has an elasticated waistband, the buttons, everything about it. So I am planning on making that skirt, and I'm pretty sure that I actually even have buttons for it. So I think that I am good with everything that I need. The next pattern by Sew Liberated that I'm planning on making are the Aeronite pants. And so this is another pattern that I made, actually another green linen rayon blend fabric from Joann that I used, although this one was a little bit more of a rayon content, so it's a little bit, it's not as stiff, so it's, you know, it's nice a floaty fabric. And I'm pretty sure that I've posted about these pants on my Instagram before, but I just love the feel of them, and I wore them non-stop in the fall. Like I wore them apple picking, I wore them to the beach. I just couldn't stop wearing them, so I need to make another few pairs. I actually ended up making a pair with some knit fabrics. I did make the knit version, and I wear them as lounging pants around the house all the time. So I'm planning on making a few more out of linen fabrics. I'm hoping to make a pair of black ones for sort of everyday wear, and then we'll see what other colors I have, because I just love the fit and how comfy they are, and they're kind of like secret pajama pants. And then the last pattern are the Otis overalls, which I have twirled, and I don't think that I have posted about, but I actually lived in those overalls for weeks after I made them. They were just so comfortable, and I really love the fit. I got the fit right, I got the rise right, everything just like fits perfectly. And now I just have to make the actual final product. So I actually have 2 different fabrics that I can use to make the final pants out of, or the overalls out of. So we'll see which ones I decide to choose, and they happen to both be like a rust color. So one is a rust color linen, and then the other is a rust color corduroy fabric that I purchased as well. So definitely plan on making those because I just love the fit. I love how easy it is to throw on a pair of overalls and just go, and they really look good on a curvier body, which is very difficult sometimes for overalls. So I just love everything about them. So I will finally make the final overalls and continue to wear my toile around the house, as you know, I've been using them for gardening. I've used them for everything. So the next pattern is actually one for my husband, and this one was in my fall plans video, and I just never got around to it, and so I do want to get to this project fairly soon before the spring hits. And it's the M7638, and it's just a hooded jacket. So I have everything that I need for this jacket. I have the buttons, I have the fabric, I have the batting, everything. I have everything I need to make this pattern, so I actually need to finally make it. So I am hoping to make that up this year. And then on the quilted jacket trend, I need to finish my Hovia jacket. So I actually started it, and it's almost completely finished with the exception of the binding that goes all around the jacket. So I need to finally finish it. So that is my plan for this year, is to finally finish it, especially before the spring weather comes along, so I can wear it all spring long. So next up, I plan on making the Mina dress by Seamwork. And so this one is going to be along the lines of, you know, sort of trying to use up as much of my fabric scraps as I possibly can. And so obviously with your small fabric scraps, it's great. You can use them up, you know, to make little patchwork items. But I actually have some pretty large fabric scraps of linen from my Hovia jacket. Because since I was using like a quilted, I was making an actual quilt pattern, I sort of overestimated how much fabric I was going to need based on the amount of fabric that the pattern called for, because obviously the pattern calls for a certain amount of fabric depending on if you're going to make your jacket a solid color, but because I was quilting it, I didn't know how much I would need, so I definitely overestimated. I think I bought 1.5 yards of each of the fabrics, of the contrasting colors, and then one of the fabrics, which was part of the jacket itself but also the lining, I think I had bought something like 3 or 4 yards. So I have a lot of fabric left over. And so with this fabric, I actually have been in love with the thread and sprout dresses, and how, you know, she sort of has like these organic shaped linen dresses using patches of fabric, and so I really fell in love with those dresses. And so I'm going to make a thread and sprout inspired Mina dress. And so I actually have already twirled it. So I did that last weekend. I had a long weekend, so I spent the weekend sewing. And so I ended up making the top version just because I didn't want to make a full dress. And I got the fit perfect for where I wanted it. So now I'm actually ready to make the actual dress. And so hopefully in the coming weeks, I'll be able to make that up, use up all of my scraps. I think I more or less know how I'm going to lay everything out, figuring out how to actually sew everything together, especially with like the curves and things like that. And then actually sewing it, and I think it'll be like the perfect spring dress. So I'm really looking forward to making that one. So that was number 7. Number 8 is the Matilda dress by Untitled Thoughts. And this one is one that was actually on my to make list last year as well. And so I actually have enough fabric to make 2 dresses of this one. And so initially I had bought this pattern because I had been gifted some knit fabric that is just beautiful, and it'll make a beautiful dress. And this is a wrap dress that's specifically designed for knit fabric, so you know, I just loved it. I loved the dress itself, as well as the fact that, you know, I had this knit fabric to work with. And then over the holidays, I actually had planned to make myself a velvet version for like as my holiday dress, which I just never got around to because December was just crazy. So I actually have the fabric for that as well. So I'm planning to make myself both a spring version as well as a holiday version of the Matilda dress. So stay tuned for that. So that's number 8. And then last but not least is the Wolf Work dress by Jacqueline C. Slack. And so again, you know, I have the video of the making process of the pink version, which was technically my wearable 12 version of the dress. And I really love the weight of that linen. It's a linen cotton blend. I think it's a Kaufman fabric. And I love, you know, I love the look of the solid for that dress. So I have a few different fabrics in my stash that I could potentially use. I also saw one fabric on the website that I loved as well, which is also, you know, the same linen cotton blend, but it's like it's a nice like terracotta color with like speckles all over it. So that was one that I was really drawn to as well. So we'll see. But I just love the dress. I love the fit of it. I love how easy it is. I love that I can wear it with my leggings and, you know, sort of in sweaters when it's cooler, or, you know, just wear it because I made the sleeveless version, or just wear it sleeveless, you know, when it's warm outside. And it's just such a comfortable dress, and I definitely need another one in my wardrobe. So that takes you through my planned makes for 2022. It is a pretty lengthy list, but I definitely sort of thought through not only the things or the fabric and yarn that I already had in my stash, but also patterns that I had in my stash, but also where I think that either I needed to plug in a few holes in my wardrobe, as well as a few items that I wanted to remake as well. So I'm really excited about this list. And as I mentioned, I've already finished 2 of my knitting items. None of the sewing items have been finished yet. I think it's been so cold here that I've been wanting to do nothing but drink tea and knit. So I'm sure I'll be finishing some more sewing projects as the year progresses and as things warm up here, or the weather warms up, I should say, here. So I'm really excited to see how much of my list I complete, and, you know, sort of have a full finished wardrobe to show you all at the end of the year. So I hope that you enjoyed watching this video and sort of going through my planned makes for the year. Let me know what your goals are for your making this year, whether it's knitting goals, sewing goals, whatever craft it is that you enjoy. Let me know what your goals are for this year, if you have any crafting goals for the year. I think I mentioned in my last video I do want to have some chatty videos as well, so I will link my form below where you can ask me any questions that I will answer in those videos, and I'll have them, you know, sort of uploaded sporadically as an extra video for you all. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed spending your Sunday morning with me. If you are watching this in real time, that your year has been off to a good start. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.